The darkened chamber hummed with an unnerving quiet, punctuated only by the faint buzz of holographic displays and the steady click of boots on polished metal floors. A round table dominated the room, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. Alien delegates, their features diverse and often unsettling, stared intently at the projection flickering in the center. On it, a distant star system was displayed, its core gleaming white, surrounded by a collection of debris. "What is that?" Admiral Rilankara's voice was sharp, betraying both surprise and barely contained fury. Her mandibles twitched, a reflexive gesture of distaste. "This isn't some mining catastrophe." "It's not," Commander Valen Drake replied, his voice steady but laced with concern. He studied the projection from his seat at the far end of the table. The image shifted, zooming in on the remnants of a massive installation, its orbital defenses reduced to smoldering ruins. "This is Earth's fleet." The room fell into stunned silence. For a moment, only the faint hum of the station's life support systems could be heard. Admiral Kara's eyes narrowed, her scales shifting to a darker shade of red. "Explain yourself, Commander," she demanded. Valen's eyes flickered to the side, where his right-hand strategist, Gila Aaron, stood silently at the ready. She was calm, composed, but even she couldn't hide the faint flicker of tension in her normally focused expression. "We did not," Valen began, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. "We did not intend for this. We were performing a standard procedure when the installation fired on us without warning. We retaliated. It was an error. The system malfunctioned." The projection shifted again, this time showing the human fleet, sleek, efficient, and far more powerful than anything the Council had expected. The ships glowed with a strange, pulsing energy, their hulls adorned with intricate but intimidating patterns. "I know you'll find this difficult to believe," Valen continued, his tone betraying a rare edge of frustration, "but we had no intention of initiating hostilities. This wasn't an act of war." "You call this not an act of war?" Kara's voice rang out, louder now, filled with disbelief. "The destruction of one of our most secure installations, destroyed in a matter of hours by a single fleet? That is not a mistake. It is a declaration of hostility, Commander." Valen met her gaze, his posture stiffening. "We are not your enemies, Admiral. Our people have no interest in war. We're here to forge alliances." Across the table, the other members of the Galactic Council exchanged uneasy glances. A tall, slender creature with translucent skin and multifaceted eyes spoke up, its voice high-pitched and resonant. "Is this true? Could this have been an accident?" The Council had gathered to discuss the possibility of peace, a new era of cooperation. Humans, having recently achieved the ability to travel beyond their own solar system, were desperate for allies in the vast, unpredictable universe. But now everything was in jeopardy. Gila, standing beside Valen, crossed her arms. Her sharp gaze flicked toward the table, assessing the room. It was clear she was already calculating every possible outcome. The stakes had just been raised higher than anyone could have imagined. "They fired first," Gila said, her voice cutting through the growing tension. "If we had not retaliated, they would have destroyed us, too. This isn't a matter of aggression, it's survival." Kara's eyes flashed. "Then why is your fleet so powerful? How is it that humanity, so young and untested, possesses technology far surpassing anything we've ever seen?" Valen felt the weight of her question like a physical blow. "Our fleet was built to defend, not to conquer. We did not know we were so advanced. We don't even understand half of what our technology can do." Silence swept through the room, broken only by the occasional beep from a console. Kara leaned forward, her mandibles clicking in thought. The other delegates were murmuring among themselves in a language Valen did not understand, their expressions a mixture of fear and intrigue. "I think it's time to see what humanity truly wants," one of the delegates, a soft-spoken Avrili diplomat, said quietly. His voice was one of caution, but there was a spark of curiosity beneath it. "But the question remains, what will happen if we don't respond in kind?" "We will stand by our decision," Valen said firmly, despite the rising uncertainty gnawing at him. He had come here to negotiate peace, not to fight. Then it's war, Kara said coldly, her tone final. She stood, her figure tall and imposing, before turning sharply to face the others. Prepare the fleets. Valen's chest tightened. He had hoped for a different outcome, but the realization struck him like a jolt of electricity. His worst fear was coming true. Humanity was now at the center of a galaxy-wide storm, and the only thing that might save them was the truth. But would the Council believe him? We won't fight if we don't have to, Valen said, almost as if to himself. A voice from the far side of the table cut through his thoughts. Commander, you may not have a choice. The room, once filled with uncertainty, now buzzed with growing tension, and Valen realized that his next words could decide the fate of humanity's future. The bridge of the Endurance was a flurry of activity as Valen Drake paced back and forth, his boots clicking against the cool steel floor. His mind raced through countless scenarios, each one darker than the last. The Galactic Council's decision was imminent, but Valen knew the fragile thread of diplomacy could snap at any moment. His crew watched him in silence, their faces grim. This is madness, Gila Aaron murmured, standing by the tactical console. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the frustration in her tone was palpable. Her short, dark hair, normally neatly styled, hung messily around her face as she punched commands into the terminal. We're not ready for war, Valen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Valen turned to her, his eyes shadowed with both anger and regret. I know, Gila. But I can't stop it now. We've already crossed the point of no return. A deep breath escaped his lips, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his chest. He moved to the central console, placing his hand on the cool surface, trying to steady himself. The image of Kara's cold stare from the council chambers lingered in his mind, her words still echoing in his ears. Then it's war. Across the bridge, Lieutenant Omar Castan stood at a communications station, his eyes wide as he stared at the incoming signal. Commander, the fleet's ready, he said, his voice tight with tension. All ships are in position, and the first wave of Zircon forces is already en route. It's now or never. Valen's gaze flickered toward the viewport, where the black expanse of space stretched out before them. The silence of the void was deafening, yet it somehow amplified the pressure building inside him. His mind wandered back to Earth, his family, his home. He hadn't asked for any of this. He hadn't asked to become a leader, to carry the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. And yet, here he was, ready to face the consequences of a decision made by forces far beyond his control. He clenched his fists, feeling the tension in his muscles. We fight to survive, Omar. That's all we can do now. The sound of rapid footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Commander Valen Drake turned to see Gila approaching, her expression serious. Valen, she began, her voice steady but firm. We've received an encrypted transmission from the Council. They're calling for an immediate ceasefire, but they want us to stand down first. They're giving us one final chance to surrender before their fleets move in. Valen's stomach tightened. He'd expected this, the Council would always try to negotiate, to control the situation. But surrender? That was something he couldn't even consider. I'm not surrendering, he said, his voice like steel. We won't kneel to anyone. Not to the Zircons, not to anyone. Gila nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and caution. I thought you'd say that. But we need to be smart about this. The Zircons don't care about a ceasefire. They've made their position clear. Valen didn't respond immediately, his mind working through his options. He couldn't risk humanity becoming the enemy of every other species in the galaxy. But he also couldn't give in, not when the stakes were this high. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp trill of the communications console. Commander, Lieutenant Castan said, his voice tense, we've got a fleet in our sector, 3 Zircon dreadnoughts, 2 heavy cruisers. They've dropped out of hyperspace just outside our range. They're preparing to engage. Valen's heart skipped a beat. The situation had escalated faster than he had anticipated. "Bring up the tactical map," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of authority. The screen flickered to life, displaying the positions of the incoming Zircon ships. "Full shields, bring the forward cannons online," Valen commanded, his voice sharp. "We'll engage on our terms." Sheila moved quickly to the tactical display, her fingers flying over the controls as she accessed the fleet's systems. "Weapons online," she reported, her voice betraying a hint of urgency. "Shield integrity holding at 85%. We're ready." "Good," Valen said, his gaze flicking to the viewport. His crew was tense, waiting for his orders. Their fate rested in his hands, and he could feel the weight of it bearing down on him like 100 tons of steel. "We're not backing down. Let them come." The countdown began on the screen, the numbers ticking away like the seconds of their lives, each moment bringing them closer to the inevitable. Tension built to a breaking point, and Valen found himself holding his breath, steeling himself for what was to come. 3, Gila whispered. 2. 1. Now. The Endurance lurched as it powered into motion, engines roaring to life with a hum that reverberated through the ship. Outside, the massive Zircon dreadnoughts loomed closer, their colossal forms blotting out the stars. Valen's mind was sharp, calculating every angle, every potential outcome. His crew moved as one, their training kicking in. They were ready. "Fire," Valen ordered, and the Endurance erupted with a fury of weapons fire. The Zircon dreadnoughts responded in kind, their weapons lashing out in a deadly dance of energy and metal. As the battle raged on, Valen's thoughts were consumed with a single question: could humanity survive what was coming? The answer, he knew, would determine not just their future, but the future of the galaxy itself. The battle had erupted into chaos. On the bridge of the Endurance, Valen Drake's eyes flicked from one monitor to the next, tracking the rapid movements of the Zircon fleet. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. The massive dreadnoughts loomed ominously in the void, each one a force of destruction capable of erasing entire worlds with a single blow. Yet, it was humanity's fleet that had drawn first blood. "We're not backing down," he reminded himself. "Shields are holding at 60%, Gila Aaron's voice cut through the noise of the ship's systems, her tone controlled despite the adrenaline in her veins. She had always been a calm presence in the storm. "Weapons are fully charged. The enemy's not letting up, though. They've already launched 2 waves of fighter drones." Valen's gaze swept over the tactical display. The Zircons were relentless, and though the Endurance was a formidable vessel, it was clear that it was outmatched. The energy blasts from the Zircon dreadnoughts streaked past the ship, splintering debris into the cold void of space. "Activate the secondary disruptor beams," Valen commanded, his voice low but forceful. "I want their fighters disabled, now." Sheila didn't hesitate. She input the commands, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The disruptor beams shot out in bursts of shimmering energy, slicing through the Zircon drones like hot knives through butter. A brief spark of hope flickered in Valen's chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could hold their own long enough for reinforcements to arrive. But even as the drones were neutralized, the Zircon warships closed in. The pressure was mounting, every second feeling like an eternity. Every blast of energy from the enemy ships brought them closer to the point of no return. "Commander." Lieutenant Caston's voice crackled over the comms. "Zircon forces are flanking us on both sides. We're surrounded." Valen exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. He had trained for this moment, and now was the time to prove that humanity's resolve was stronger than anything the galaxy could throw at them. But the stakes had never been this high. One wrong move, and they would be wiped out in a matter of minutes. "Sheila," Valen said, eyes fixed on the tactical map, "how long until the Revenant arrives with reinforcements?" She checked her readout, then met his eyes. 5 minutes, maybe less. But we won't last that long if we don't find a way to break their formation. A low hum reverberated through the ship as the first wave of Zircon missiles began their descent, lighting up the tactical screen like a swarm of angry fireflies. Valen's mind raced. "They'll break through our shields before help arrives." He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Humanity had to make its stand now. "Prepare a direct assault," he ordered. Chila's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Direct assault? Are you?" "Do it," Valen interrupted, his voice steady. "We'll push straight through their lines. We're human. We don't retreat." The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but they trusted Valen. They had no choice but to follow his lead. The Endurance jolted as the command was executed. The ship veered sharply, engines flaring to life with an intensity that shook the entire vessel. The Zircon ships were unprepared for the sudden maneuver, and the Endurance sliced through the enemy's outer defenses with a burst of firepower. "Direct hit!" Chila shouted, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "Their shields are down." But their victory was short-lived. The Zircons quickly regrouped, launching a volley of plasma charges that slammed into the Endurance's hull. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring as the port side shields flickered dangerously. "We've lost aft shields." Lieutenant Caston's voice rose in alarm. "Hull integrity at 30%. "Damn it," Valen muttered under his breath. He gripped the console, feeling the vibrations of the ship's strained frame beneath his fingertips. His crew was fighting with everything they had, but there was only so much they could do. His eyes flicked to the approaching dreadnoughts. Even if they survived this encounter, they would be sitting ducks without reinforcements. He had one last card to play. "Chila," Valen said, his voice calmer now, "activate the Alpha Strike. We're going all in." Chila's eyes widened, but she didn't question him. "Activating Alpha Strike." Valen stood, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. This was the moment of truth. The ship's primary weapon systems powered up, a deep, rumbling sound vibrating through the deck plates. The Endurance was now a fully charged, lethal instrument of war. "All hands brace for impact," Valen commanded. "We strike now." The ship's main cannons fired, and the concentrated energy blast shot toward the largest of the Zircon dreadnoughts. The explosion of light was blinding, and for a moment, Valen dared to believe that they had succeeded. But as the glow faded, the Zircon ship still loomed, scarred but intact. "Direct hit," Chila confirmed, her voice taut. "It's still operational." Valen's breath caught in his throat. The Zircons weren't like anything they had encountered before. Humanity had yet to face an enemy with this kind of endurance. "Get ready for the second wave," Valen muttered, his mind whirring with calculations. He wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The battle raged on, and the question still lingered in Valen's mind: would humanity be able to survive against an enemy that seemed insurmountable? The cold silence of space was shattered by the rumble of the Endurance's engines as it surged forward, narrowly evading another barrage of plasma fire. The Zircon dreadnoughts loomed ominously ahead, their immense shadows swallowing the light of distant stars. For the first time since the battle had begun, Valen Drake felt something that wasn't just adrenaline, dread. It was an uncomfortable sensation, an echo of vulnerability, and it gnawed at him, like the biting chill of the void itself. His hands gripped the command console harder, a tinge of frustration creeping into his thoughts. "We can't keep running. We have to finish this now." "Chila," he snapped, "status on the Revenant?" Her face was pale under the dim glow of the tactical display, her voice steady, though the tension was evident. "Still 30 seconds out." "But Commander," she hesitated, eyes darting to the readout, "we don't have 30 seconds. We're not going to last that long." Another series of missiles slammed into the Endurance's port side, rattling the entire ship. The crew braced themselves, the jarring impact sending a ripple through the hull. Sparks danced from a console near the aft control panel, and alarms screamed in protest. Valen's eyes narrowed. "All damage reports, now!" "Structural integrity at 20%, Castan reported from his station, his voice tight. "Shields are nearly down. We've got no defense left." Valen's breath hitched as the gravity of the situation settled in. There would be no reinforcements in time. The Endurance was on its own. And they were surrounded, cornered by the relentless might of the Zircon fleet. His crew, his family, was running out of time. Out of options. "Commander, we can't fight our way out of this," Gila said, her voice thick with the weight of truth. "Even if we get through the next wave, the Revenant can't save us. Not in time. We need to make a choice." Valen's gaze hardened, looking past the immediate danger to the long-term cost. They had no way of knowing how many Zircon ships had made it past the blockade to the human colonies. He couldn't risk losing everything. His jaw clenched as he turned to face his crew. "I won't let humanity fall. Not like this." Gila shot him a look, unreadable but full of understanding. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming next. Valen had made his decision. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a fight for the future. He turned back to the tactical display and spoke with determination. "Prepare the Alpha 9 protocol." There was a collective intake of breath. The Alpha 9 protocol was a last resort strategy, an ancient maneuver developed for situations like this. It was a one-way mission, and it required a sacrifice, an ultimate gambit. A suicide run. "You're not serious," Gila whispered, her voice almost lost in disbelief. Valen met her gaze, unflinching. "I am. This is the only way." "Commander," she tried to argue, but her words faltered. The truth was, they all knew it. There was no other way to end this, no other way to stop the Zircons from ravaging Earth. The ship lurched again as another barrage of fire slammed into the shields. With a determined breath, Valen continued. "Activate the secondary thrusters. I'll guide us in." Gila nodded, though her expression was torn. "This is madness." "It's the only choice," Valen replied, more to himself than to her. "Humanity's strength lies in its willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. We do this, and we stop them. We buy the colonies a chance." "Understood," Gila said, and her voice broke for the first time. She didn't need to say more. The sacrifice was agreed upon, unspoken between them all. "Castan," Valen barked, "coordinate the manual systems. We need maximum speed." Lieutenant Castan's hands flew across his controls, locking in the final command that would send the Endurance on its one-way trajectory. The ship began to accelerate, despite the near-total failure of its systems, its momentum building like a hammer about to strike. The Zircon dreadnoughts, realizing what was happening, adjusted their positions, locking weapons onto the Endurance. "We're at max velocity," Castan said, voice calm but resigned. "We're locked onto target." Gila's fingers danced across the console, eyes reflecting the hard resolve she had once never believed she'd have to summon. "Ready to fire on your mark." Valen paused for a brief moment, absorbing the weight of the decision. Then, without another word, he turned to face his crew. His voice came out with quiet finality. "This is it. For humanity." He slammed the command button. The Endurance shot forward, a streak of defiance against the overwhelming Zircon fleet. As it charged toward the heart of the enemy formation, a final volley of fire erupted from the Zircon ships. But Valen didn't flinch. And then, in the blink of an eye, the Endurance detonated, a blinding flash of light that engulfed the surrounding ships. The battle fell silent. And for just a moment, the Zircons hesitated, as if unsure what had just occurred. In that moment, humanity's greatest weapon, its unity, its willingness to sacrifice for something greater, had delivered the first blow. The tide of war had changed.